So, while I was waiting for the weather to clear up some more so I could film, I decided to mess around with a couple of emulators. And it got me to thinking, how do some of these old games hold up when rendered in 4K? So starting this off, we have the newest game on my list, which was Super Mario Bros. Galaxy 2, which, well, looked like this when it was running on the Wii. And it's not bad, but it's pretty much garbage compared to what we're used to. It's not too bad on a CRT, but do keep in mind that on any recent TV it doesn't hold up very well. But what happens when you turn that resolution up to a solid 4K? Well, this happens, and for a first game I really couldn't ask for a better start. The texture and water quality saw a massive increase, as well as just generally appearing to look way nicer than the original game. This really goes to show how nice Wii games could have looked, if most people saw something better than a 480i picture through a composite cable. The same thing goes for even the earliest of Wii games though, really, as Wii Sports, which I'm sure we all remember, looks amazing when rendered at a resolution that isn't 480i. Although it's hard to play without a real Wii controller, which you can actually use if you have a Bluetooth adapter, but unfortunately I have lost mine, so I'm trying to play bowling using an Xbox controller. Still, it beats using cheat codes on Wii Fit. But regardless, it just goes to show that those games that are over 10 years old can look fairly good regardless of whatever genre they actually are. As for something next to this, we have The Legend of Zelda Windwaker, which we're running at a solid 4K once again. And as for a GameCube game, this was probably one of the most well-aging games of all time. Admittedly, it didn't look too bad when it was running with some proper SCART cables in 480p, but this game is still probably one of my all-time favourite Zelda games, so the leap to 4K is exceptional for me and for anyone that's looking at it. In terms of detail, the game is absolutely vibrant and it looks like it was designed to be ran at these resolutions. Still, the heads-up display is dated as it was created in 480p, and in the distance you'll probably notice that pop-ins can become a bit of an issue due to the lack of draw distance that the game renders in. It's not noticeable at 480p, but in 4K it's definitely a bit of an issue. But once you get past that, this game is great in 4K. Now, this game was one of the final games for the GameCube, and when you look at it in 4K, you can definitely see why. Twilight Princess was also released on the Wii with a few differences, but I'll be looking at the GameCube version as it is arguably the better version of the game. And with 4K, the water and the textures really do look nice. But without investigating a fix, you can see the water textures become very stretched when playing in 16:9. However, this is more of an issue with the game not liking running in 4K with widescreen enabled. You could swap it to 4:3 or just lower the resolution a tad to fix this. There may be some tweaks available online which could make it even more playable, all while looking like it could have been released on the next generation up from this. As for the PlayStation, I was really surprised by what this console was capable of, considering this is 1996 hardware we're dealing with. And although 4K is a little bit extreme here, trust me, I tried, it would just crash, and in general it just wasn't worth it with all the bugs and just crashing all the time. But we did get around 5 times enhanced native resolution, as well as filter enhancements, anti-aliasing, etc. and things like that. And as you can see by Medal of Honor, one of the most graphically demanding games out there for the console, I'll argue that it looks great. And once again, it looks like it could have been shifted an entire generation forward. Moving on to Metal Gear Solid, which also looks very impressive. And I must say, the one thing that I've noticed about these games running on the PS1 is that no matter what enhancements I was running here, they ran absolutely fine. There were no game-breaking bugs, there was no graphical glitches, the games just ran and looked as good as possible. Widescreen wasn't an issue, and unlike the other games, I literally can't point out any flaws during my time playing. So for this sake, I'm going to say PS1 emulation with some upscaling is definitely one of the ways to play the games, without any downsides whatsoever. As long as you don't want to push things as far as 4K all the time, that is. But Metal Gear Solid 1, what can I say, it was impressive at the time, and in these textures with these resolutions and all the filtering, it does look pretty damn great. Although not a PS1 game here, I did just want to show you guys Metal Gear Solid the Twin Snakes, which is a GameCube adaptation of the game, and displayed no issues whatsoever. Although this was running in 4K with some enhancements, there were no issues whatsoever, no pop-ins, no scaling issues at all. So really it'd be your pick for how to experience the original Metal Gear Solid game. All of these have their perks, and even the original in 240p on the PS1 isn't too bad once you get into it. But for the least dated visuals and the most up-to-date features, I'd say this version is definitely the way to go. Now, the Nintendo 64 is a really weird console when it comes to emulation, as the scene is now evolving rapidly, as there seems to be a rejuvenation in the spirit behind emulating this console, so there's a lot of new stuff happening around it. So most of the games either aged well and can be improved nicely, or they can't really be touched at all and are going to look like garbage regardless. I decided to choose 3 games which I felt aged very well. Admittedly, by now you're probably beginning to see a pattern, as the first on my list is The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, which has aged quite nicely for an early Nintendo 64 game. It's being rendered in 1080p instead of 240p, however the menu, as you may notice, does seem a little bit blurry in comparison to some PS1 games of the time. The textures do seem a little bit stretched here, as the game is generally quite bright, which leads to the textures popping out. You can see little gaps where there shouldn't be, and it's not too bad, and it's definitely an improvement, but some things should really just stay hidden by the low resolution textures, which is why I'm eager to move on to Majora's Mask, as not only does the darker nature of the game seem to help the low poly textures, but the overall feel of the game benefits from the leap to 1080p, with areas of Clock Town appearing in much more detail. Pop-ins can be seen on occasion, but generally this is more of an issue with the increased rendering resolution rather than the game. The anthroposcopic filtering and anti-aliasing more than make up for this though, with distant textures actually appearing less muddy than before, and less jagged edges appear on characters as well as the environments, a trait which seems to carry on regardless of whatever game you're playing when emulating it with Project 64. But moving away from the Zelda games for a second, it's time to look at the best aging Nintendo 64 game I could find on the console, with Super Smash Bros. On the Nintendo 64 really shining through due to its more cartoon-based aesthetic compared to those 2 other games. Not only does it run at a solid 60 FPS for the majority of the time, in fact all of the time when being emulated, but the resolution and enhancements give the stages and characters an extra level of detail that was hidden on the console's original resolution. Not only this, but paired with that 60 FPS gameplay that's baked into the game, it could definitely pass for a later title, even maybe an early GameCube game with its personality and charm. But once again, let's move on to another console with the PS2, which is in a similar state to the Nintendo 64. The games it does work with look pretty amazing with the improvements, but it can be a bit buggy to set up, and in a lot of games you will get some display issues. But emulating the PS2 is quite the feat, so I'm glad we're at the stage we are now. And most of the time, my experiences have been buttery smooth. So starting off with Metal Gear Solid 2, arguably one of the best games of all time, it ran absolutely smooth. For some reason though, my recording with the PS2 emulator was a bit odd. I could play them completely fine, but due to some weird layering issues, the textures became jumbled and it just wouldn't let me show you exactly what I was seeing on screen till I swapped to just recording my entire monitor, which I think has worked quite nicely. Admittedly, I have only played the Xbox version of this game, but I definitely get away with playing this on the PS2 emulator, as not only did it run nice, but it scaled remarkably well with the increased resolution, and all in all was surprising for a game that is over 15 years old. In fact, my main issue with it was definitely the controls, as I didn't feel as tight as the real console or the Xbox version of the game, but that may just be down to how I mapped them. Following this, we have the most outstanding result yet with Dragon's Quest VIII, which starts with some rather disappointing looking cutscenes which really reduced my hopes that the game would even look any good. But as soon as the game skipped into action, the 4K goodness hit me. Textures were refined, details were popping, textures were clean, performance was flawless. But unfortunately, I noticed there was one issue. At certain intervals, very rarely, the sky could turn purple, although this wasn't for all of the game, so it didn't bother me too much. And personally, I'd take this trade-off for the stunning visual presented here, as the game has aged incredibly well. Finally, on the PS2 front, we have Battlefront 2, which was a weird one, as the main reason to emulate this is the split-screen play, as the option isn't available on the PC port of the game. And it ran alright and looked good enough too, especially with it rendering in 4K. Not as good as the PC version though, as that seems to be probably the best way to experience the game. And if you want to see how well that holds up in 2017, the Game Show recently made an awesome video which covers all those little details as well as some of the graphics mods available for it. As the PS2 version works, I'd suggest using it if you really need split screen, but there were some issues relating to draw distance, sky issues, and although it was still playable, and you want to get your Battlefront 2 split screen fixed in something higher than 480p, it is way more than doable, but you'll have to spend some time tweaking and fixing some issues if you want a true Battlefront 2 experience. And of course, last of all, we have Dragon's Quest IX, which I enhance as much as possible using Drastic, which is a fairly bad emulator, but it's the best Nintendo DS emulator we have on Windows till Melon DS picks up speed. It looked better than it did beforehand and isn't too bad considering this was a game from a portable console from a while ago, and probably one of their best portable games at that. There isn't much that can be done to increase the resolution, but still with some enhancements here or there, I'd still play it. In fact, I'd probably still just play it anyways. So if you really want to get some more emulation-based content, then I can always make more videos like this if you enjoyed it, as the weather isn't always great, so I try to film when I can, and there is definitely that large video coming, but you'll have to wait around for that a little bit longer. Thank you very much for watching, good night.